All right, well, welcome. We're glad you're here, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful day with Rich Smith. The recommendation for bringing Rich back came from you, and those of you that were able to join us for the 2-day PLC Institute with the DeFores that Rich facilitated got a taste of working with Rich, but it was really all of us as PLC leaders on that day 3 where he was then in charge and brought us through things that I saw become kind of some of our standard work this past year. And he showed us that crazy looking 1-page flow chart of what it takes to get through a complete cycle as a PLC team. And I saw your leadership teams take those and make them your own and bring them into your standard work and practice last year. And that was one, excuse me, of many gifts that Rich shared last year. And I was probably most moved by Rich's last 10 minutes with us when he shared his own story about his elementary teacher that made sure that whatever it took, he was going to leave her classroom reading well. And that meant, through a lot of humor, that Rich injected some afternoon after school sessions, and how he was trying to rally his own family to get him out of that bind. But at the end of the day, the huge success and what he credits to his future success was that elementary teacher that knew that he couldn't read well, that ensured that by the time he left, he could read well. And if I just looked at our system, if you only had one wish as a superintendent, it's that all of our kids could read well. So no matter what their future is, and no matter what challenge that they'll face, that they can navigate through the life system. Kelly Harder, who is the Dakota County lead for Dakota County Services, called me Nancy Allen Mastro, the West St. Paul superintendent, and the Burnsville superintendent, as we are the 3 districts with some of the highest poverty ratios in Dakota County. And he said, I just came back from one of our huge sessions out east, and during our time learning in our roles as service leaders around the country, and there were probably 100 or so of us, we had to articulate what was most important for citizens to become independent and self-sufficient. And he said, I've come to the realization that if kids aren't reading well, and if they're really not reading well by 3rd grade, that they will be dependent on our system, and we will need as a county to continue to support them all the way up the line. And so I'd like to partner with you as a Dakota County service lead, and I don't know how it will all work, but I'd like to partner with you 3 superintendents and your school districts and us as the service center to help support you in all of helping your kids read well by 3rd grade. And I said, well, hallelujah, because we are on that mission. And if I could just share one struggle, Kelly, is that we've opened more preschool slots, free preschool, so our kids could get on a free bus to come to our elementary schools. They can come into our free preschool slot. Before they even start that, they can have a free breakfast They can have a free lunch after their morning session, and they can have free childcare in the afternoon to go home on a free bus. We've eliminated all the barriers, but our relationship, we don't know where the high poverty families are in our community. The families that are coming to access our preschool programs, they come to us. We do marketing things, but we don't know where the families that need the greatest support are. And you can't tell us because of data privacy. So he says, okay, we'll work on that. So we met last week. That is one of our subgroups on how to work with our legal teams to break through the barriers so they can tell us where the families are that need the most help. Because we were building bridges to Neighbors, our food shelf organization in South St. Paul, just to find those families. And we're having some success. We're just not sure that we're getting the families that need it the most. So by the time they come onto your kindergarten doorsteps, they are more likely to have the early literacy skills that you need as kindergarten teachers and first grade teachers to be successful all the way up the line. So, I'm excited about where we've come in my first few years working with you as superintendent. I'm excited to see where we're going to go in my next years working with you as superintendent. We've come a long way. We've had some great success, and we still have a lot of work ahead of us. We have wonderful teams in place throughout the district. We have some incredible support from our community, from our school board, and I'm going to turn it over first to Woody, to our new union lead. I said, Woody, could you just say a few words? Your first month on the job, but in the first month, he and I have collaborated on 3 or 4 things that will already make some positive support and greater support for all individuals in our district. So Woody, take it away for a minute.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. First of all, welcome back to the school year. About the earliest start we've ever had. A couple quick thank yous. Number one, thank you, every one of you, for stepping up and being here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jim Woodburn, the new union president as of July 1st. Then I would also like to thank Jane Stassen, because we're at 1200 Stassen Lane, so obviously that lane was named after her. You can tell that's good. Third thank you is to Carrie Annenson, because she likes to be pointed out and embarrassed, but she has to be in charge of my PLC, and it's an interesting PLC, isn't it, Carrie, and how she's going to step up this year to do that. Lastly, we are working in collaboration a lot more, and I'm also working on community connections, probably more than we ever have. First one I'd like to invite you to participate in, and it's a very easy one. We're going to try and connect with Neighbors right away on the first day that we're back, which is August 18th. If you could be so kind as to bring in one non-perishable food item, we're going to collect that as a union and turn that into Neighbors right away. We're going to try and do things like that and connect with the community a lot more than we have. And as far as the collaboration goes, Dr. Webb is probably being pretty kind. We have met so many times over some kind of tough issues, but we've also come up with some really positive things too, and we're trying to work with more collaboratively than we have before too. So thank you, and have a good school year.
There's no shortage of tough issues. All of us have those in our personal lives, in our work lives. So yesterday we dropped our kids off at camp, 2 of our youngest kids, and my wife's mom lives in Wisconsin, and the camp is right next door, so we kind of make a day of it. But about noon we packed up, got out the door, drove to Amory, Wisconsin, visited Grandma, dropped the kids off at camp, came back, had dinner with Grandma, and drove back home. And as we walked in the house of our door, there was like this overwhelming gas smell that just hit all of us. And the last minute before one of my youngest kids left, they grabbed we have just a a little stool that sits at our kitchen counter. And they grabbed that stool so they could reach up to the flashlight, where the flashlights are stored right above our stove. And they hit the back of the chair on the knob of our gas stove. And that was on for 9 hours. And so, fortunately we have a number of internal fans in our bathrooms in our house, and we pop all the windows open, but it was a really good time to go to that fresh and natural yogurt store to get some ice cream. So we could breathe again. So we all have plenty of those challenges, and there won't be a shortage of those this school year. The importance of us working together as union leads, as superintendents, as school boards, as principals, as leadership teams, I believe is the most important thing we do. No superintendent, no principal, no individual teacher, coach, parent can make our system great. I'll say it again. No individual superintendent or union lead or principal or coach or teacher, no one of us individually can make us great. My whole vision is that I just want to be the best. And I feel that that's what you want too. And last year I was jazzed by Rich coming in because I felt he really coached us as teams to be better, and that's what I'm looking for again today. Nancy Gerber spent some time bringing in a focus within their school on growth mindset. So I just asked Nancy if she could take a few minutes this morning to just share a couple of the tips. And they started with a book reading called Mindsets in the Classroom. I've just ordered this for our administrative team too. And then last comment I'll share in my intro is that I was fortunate enough to travel with Nancy to Washington, D.C. for the IB Conference of the Americas. And Nancy was one of the featured speakers there. And they have breakout sessions throughout the time. And they have small rooms that people can break out into where there might be 50 people. And then they have really big rooms, about as big as this room, where you could probably pack 150 to 200 people in there. And she got one of the big rooms. So let's take a few minutes from Nancy, just on mindset.
Well, thank you. It was a big room, and I was really shocked. And they turned people away, and there were so many better choices. I don't know. You're here. So mindset is a idea that I learned at the Science House, professional development, and many of the people in this room have had exposure to that at the Science House as well. It is like an attitude in common vernacular, but it really refers to the work of Carol Dweck. And she has 40 years of research. In the beginning, she would give kids impossible tasks, sort of like we do. And some of them would persist, and some of them would give up. So she spent 40 years studying this. And she came up with a theory about fixed and growth mindset. So if you have a fixed mindset, you say things like, well, I'm just not good at math, or, my dad wasn't good at math, and I'm not, and I am what I am, and so what? If you have a growth mindset, then you just keep going. And if things get hard, you keep going. And those are kids that say, give me another one. I want something more difficult. And so I think about this. I got a new puppy, and so I think about this in terms of dogs. And so, like a golden retriever will just keep getting that ball, give me another one, give me another one. But you might have a class full of golden retrievers, or you might get hound dogs. And the good thing is that mindset can be taught and learned and modeled. And so our friend Hattie says that the #1 effect size is student expectations. So this relates to mindset. The best thing, the most important thing is student expectations about how they're going to do. And it's also really popular in the press right now. Paul Tough wrote a book on how children succeed. Well, it's about character. And Angela Duckworth is on the internet and she has written about grit. And James Heckman is a Nobel Prize winning economist who did work on, guess what, character. So this is really an important idea. And so I'm thinking, how does mindset relate to PLC leaders? Well, being a PLC leader is really difficult. And when our data doesn't come back the way we want it to be, it's like, wow, these kids are so dumb. Whoop, fixed mindset. So what can I do to be better? How can we help each other as a PLC and as colleagues to get better and to move those scores? Well, that's really what a PLC is about. And this deceptively simple idea of mindset, everybody says, well, I have a growth mindset, I'm a teacher. You know, the little engine that could was chugging up that hill and that ant was moving the rubber tree plant. Of course I'm a teacher, I come every day, I think that I have a growth mindset. But it turns out that it's a really difficult thing to live and to do. As soon as you say, oh, you're so smart, oh, fixed mindset. Oh, if you give feedback that is about a performance task rather than about effort, it's really difficult to live on a daily basis and to teach. And so we have each other to do that. If you have a teacher on your team who wants to give up, how many of you, when you open your plan book and you say, oh, the ATPPS peer observer's coming, this is an opportunity for me to get better. Well, hopefully if you have a fixed mindset, that's it, because it's a really powerful opportunity to get better and to support one another. And so I could probably go on, but I think that I have probably used up my 5 minutes. But this book, our ATPPS library, has a bunch of them. Right now, a bunch of Lincoln teachers are using it. This is the so what, how do I bring this idea into my classroom? How do I respond with a growth mindset and mastery response? This is difficult, I'm gonna do better. The kids aren't learning. What can we do to help one another get better? I think we're going to find that out. My goal is to have a growth mindset at least through lunch because it's really we'll go. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
So, the college and career readiness targets are the backbone of our measurement scale. And again, this isn't something that we just decided to make up one day. This is just the 24 ACT score. Most kids need to get into college, backwards mapped all the way down to our earliest grades. So this continuum for college and career readiness targets for reading and college and career readiness targets for math is just our data points. But they're data points which say, are you on track, are you proficient? Nancy made mention this year of kind of our ATPPS work and our growth work. This is a proficiency bar, but you know and I know that we have many kids that are below this bar that aren't going to hit and clear this bar this year. That's okay. Their growth is what we care about. We want every student growing and thriving and working hard and showing the effort to really continue to do their best. This is a 3-year snapshot of our reading target monitoring. It shows as a district, we've kind of hovered at around that 31, 32 percentile, 30, 31, 32 for 3 years. Secondary and reading has shown some growth. Apposia has shown some decline. Lincoln, and I would just say from last year to this year, has shown our greatest jump in reading scores. In math, you can see the story for each of our buildings. So this is just a snapshot of where we are. And data is just what it is, it's data. A growth mindset just says, can we be better off tomorrow? Can we be better off a week from now? Can we be better off next year when we come here? Hopefully again with Rich. To continue to show increase. To continue to show growth. This is a year where we're bringing in 4 coaches now to work alongside us. No one of us, again, has all the answers. What I'm most excited about is that you will have our peers working right alongside you, 4 of our coaches, to continue to support you in all that you do as PLC leaders and as classroom teachers and as principals and administrators at every school in our district. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the CLC data that we just received a couple weeks ago. And that was from the 11-12 school year. The state, when they report, sometimes is a little bit behind on kind of what they share, but the CLC was recognized as being, when compared with all other CLCs in the state, our CLC was recognized as being a high growth ALC program. I think that deserves a round of applause. I also think you can see Kaposia data there, which when Terry got that, he says, I'm ready to jump off a bridge.
Well, it was a little embellished. A small bridge.
So what I'm proud of at Kaposia is that they dug deep into the data this year. And they realized at their youngest grades, they needed some serious intervention on some of those earliest grade levels of kindergarten, first and second. They rolled up their sleeves together and really got after their reading proficiency and growth work with their students. I think that will have to pay dividends all the way up the line in years to come. And I'm excited to watch the Kaposia data in the years to come. In secondary, I've had conversations with Butch. This isn't all that he hopes for as a principal, but I'm proud of the secondary work. Last year was the very first year where we integrated more of our special ed students into first dip classroom instruction and then in previous years. We still showed growth in our reading scores overall. 2 years ago when Lincoln's scores, and I'll go back there for a minute, when we did the same thing at Lincoln, the first year, we dropped. But this last year, when we get into round 2, where we're working through the system and trying to work through some of those challenges, Lincoln had a 3% gain in math and reading. Way to go. I'm proud of your work. I'm proud to be partnering with you. I'm excited about this school year for so many reasons. And if I could just reflect on last year for a minute, I actually had a YouTube clip that I was going to click right about now. I think it said, sometimes YouTube clips in a minute can say more than I can in a half an hour as a superintendent. So there's this video clip that shows, it has 750 million views on it. So I'm pretty confident that some of you in this room have seen the video clip. But the audio on it goes something like this. Charlie bit my finger. A little giggle. finger goes back in Charlie's mouth. Charlie, ouch, that really hurts. And Charlie, the 1-year-old, giggles several times after he chomps on his older brother's finger. And long story short is, last year was a painful year for me. It's one that I hope to not repeat again in our district. And on that forming, storming, norming, performing, I'm just hoping that last year was our storming year, so now we can norm and perform. That's my hope. My hope to be the best partner I can with all of you, to support you and your teamwork to be the best that you can be, and continue to ask and continue to tell me what you need from me as your superintendent. So my hope, again, is to be the best, that we have the best readers at proficient levels district-wide, and that we get there together. With that, how about a big round of applause to welcome Rich Smith. If you could also make room, there's 3 people at the back table. Could you make room for each of those folks, whether it's Lincoln Center, Kaposia, Secondary, the district, and other team? Just make space at the table for each one of those 3.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, the first thing I'm going to tell you is, if you see me moving around a little bit today, I'm walking very stiffly. On Friday, I worked in Aurora, Colorado, right outside of Denver. Well, I used the weekend to go visit my son at the Air Force Academy. He's now a sophomore there. And so when I got there on Saturday, he said, "Dad, we got to do something. We need to go do something fun here in Colorado." And I said, "Sure, what do you want to do?" He says, "I'd like to go for a hike." I said, "Well, that sounds like a great time. I love hiking, and that'd be great. A mile and a," he said, "it's only a mile and a quarter." I said, "That's wonderful. Okay, it's walking through nature." I didn't realize that the mile and a quarter climbed 1,900 feet in that mile and a quarter. And he says, "Well, we're going to go to this special place. It's called Eagle's Nest." I should have got clued in. So by the time I got to the top of the mountain, I was literally crawling up the rocks to get to the top. Spectacular view. But you know what happens when you get to the top? You got to go down. Well, 1,900 feet going down takes the front of your thighs and turns them into jello. So today I'm kind of walking like this. You should have seen me yesterday. It took me 10 minutes to get out of bed. So bear with me today as I move around.
The wireless code is DC Public here, if anybody wants.
The wireless code is DC Public if you want to get on there, and it's one word. Folks, before we leave this, can I say something about this data and about what was said this morning? First of all, my district made huge strides when we all held hands together. And that includes having the union leadership meet with me on a weekly basis to talk about how we could do things better. We came to the realization that unless we held hands and that we really said we all own this, that we really couldn't make the strides that we needed to. The second thing is we looked at data all the time, and one of the things we did is each fall, every superintendent every principal gave what was called a principal summit, where they presented their data for the last 5 years and showed trends of how they were growing and how they were changing. And one of the things that we always said is when we looked at data, are you surprised? Are you surprised? Or is this what you knew was coming? Because if you're surprised, then you really didn't have a view of how things were going until the very end. And so our question always when we looked at anything like this is, are you surprised? Or did you know this was coming? If you were doing the monitoring along the way, then guess what? You would have had an idea where you were at. So my question is, before we leave this, does this surprise you, or did you know this was coming? Did you know your schools would perform this way? Did you know where you would be when you got these results? Quick, have that quick discussion. All right, start to come back to this. Folks, one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that we were never surprised, that we had a pretty good idea of where our kids were and where our school was going. And to that end, I told you before last time I was here, that in 2004, my district was targeted for takeover by our state. We were one of the worst 98 school districts in all of California out of 1,160. In fact, we were second from the bottom. The red line up there is the state average, and the blue line is my district, Sanger Unified, which is in the Central Valley, California. We began our PLC process and our work, and as you can see, we quickly moved upward to a point where we were exceeding the state average and moved into the top 10% of all school districts in the state. Now, folks, the catchphrase here is this: it's not the needs of the kids, but the actions of the adults that make the difference. It's not the needs of the kids, but the actions of the adults. It's what we did for ourselves, and I love the discussion about mindset because we looked at ourselves the same way. In these results, one of the things that we had going for us was a sense of urgency, a huge sense of urgency, an opportunity for us to sit down and say, we're in trouble, what are we going to do? And I would also tell you this, that at this point in time, we met with our union and we had a major discussion. We were losing over 670 kids a year across our borders. They were escaping our district. 670. And what we explained with our union and to our teachers was this: each one of those kids, when they leave our district and go somewhere else, they take $5,500 with them. Our annual allowance for the year from our state. Do the math. That's a tremendous amount of money for salaries, benefits, materials, all of the things that we say we need, but we weren't offering a product that was good enough to keep people there. Whether you believe it or not, you're in a competitive situation. And in California, we were fighting charters and other districts that were actively recruiting kids away. And who we were losing were our white English speakers, our kids that had access and could get in a car. Their parents would drive them every day across our border. And so as we began to have that talk about where we stood, we realized that our product was not good enough to capture those kids that were escaping us. And the other thing was, the state was going to tell us how to do it. Anybody here believe the state knows what to do? I would flat out tell you, if they knew, they would tell you already. And what we realized is the answers we needed were in ourselves. We had to come to grips with ourselves and look at each other and say, what are we going to do to get better? Now, I'm very proud to tell you that we're there. I'm also proud to tell you that 3 years after I left the district, it's continued that trend upward, even further than it was before. I'm also proud to tell you that in regards to students that were named special ed or placed in special ed, in 2004 we were at 10.2. That's not counting, that's just special ed resource, the basic special ed. If I added speech to that, we would be at 15, almost 16%. Virtually 1.5 kids out of every 10 was in special ed. Our best choice to help a kid was wait until he failed enough to put him in special ed. Come on, baby, one more year of failure and I can get you help. And what we became to realize there is that we had to attack those situations in an early age. Kindergarten, first, second. I love what you said about preschool. We began to see it that way. And as we worked together and as our PLCs came together and we began to solve problems sooner, we saw this decline. In 2004, it continues down. Last year, they were at 6.3 identified special ed within our district. This year, they expect to go 5.8. Here's the issue there. I'll make it dollars and cents for you. They say $1.1 million a year in special ed fees. They're making a huge difference. They're moving kids along. But we also, when we began to make these trends and our PLCs began to push together, we began to talk about best practices and how we were going to help each other. We began to realize this. A headline: low socioeconomic students can learn. That's a mindset. That's a change in what we believed. Before, we would look at each other and say, oh, look at this kid. What do you expect me to do with her? Are you kidding me? She's special ed. Oh, hey, Are you kidding me? She's 4 grade levels behind. What do you expect me to do? And what we began to say is, what can we not admire the problem, but solve the problem? Instead of admiring where the kid was at, we said, what can we do to move them forward? We also came to believe this: English learners are highly intelligent. Just because a kid spoke something other than English, we found they could learn, that they could do. To the point where we also came to this belief: all students are capable. Does your staff believe that? Do the people in your PLC believe those 3 things? Do they truly believe that it is the actions of the adults, or do they believe the needs of the students trump? Have that quick discussion. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. Hey folks, I'm going to be very pointed with you. Today is a little bit different than the first day. The first day I like to get people bought in and moving forward. I feel like you've come to that point. I feel like you understand the process. So we're going to go deeper. We're going to talk about some of the beliefs, fundamental beliefs, and we're also going to move and we're going to look at that flow chart in new terms, in deeper terms, to get the results we need. But I'm going to tell you this. You can put a lot of programs out there, but the belief systems underlying that is what makes the difference. Do people truly believe you can make a difference, or do they have the mindset that the kids can't? Are they admiring the problem or looking for solutions? Are they admiring the problem, or are they just looking for solutions? Because when you admire the problem, you'll stand for hours. And I've been in the staff room, I've done this before. Pooh, what am I supposed to do with Jack? Are you kidding me? Look at this guy, what a mess. I taught it, he didn't get it. That's admiring the problem rather than saying, what can we do with Jack? How can we make a difference? And folks, in doing this, there are risks and rewards. The risk is we have to bear ourselves out and say, by the way, I don't know, I need help. The risk is that we have to admit that we do not have the answer right now. The rewards is when we find those answers, we get higher results. The risk to give up the belief that it's the student's problem, to move from that belief to, you know what, it's a problem that I need to solve, is a huge, huge step forward. And are we willing to make that? Because the rewards are tremendous. 2 weeks ago, I opened up the Fresno Bee to find this. Sanger School District is told it ranks among the top 10 in the state. The district praised by minority advocacy groups. Folks, I was there the night the advocacy groups, the minority advocacy groups, showed up at the board meeting and basically wanted to drag the superintendent out and beat him on the sidewalk. What a change. But it began with the belief that, guess what, every kid, it has worth. Every child has worth, and we just need to find a way to get to them. Folks, we could put those sayings up on the wall everywhere around this room, but can we move to belief? Can we hold each other accountable enough to say, you know, I hear your frustration, but what can we do? I hear you're frustrated with this kid. I hear you have questions about whether this EL, this English learner, can move. What can we do to move him? That's a huge change. To come to the point where you began to look at yourself and say, what are the solutions? Now, is this district capable of doing this? Are you capable of moving your schools from admiring the problem to hunting for solutions? Are you capable of saying to one another, I hear your frustration, what can we do? Turn to your neighbor and say, is it possible to do that? Can we make that? Is it realistic for us to make that move this year, at the beginning of the year? Have that quick discussion. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. Hey, we stood in front of our staff in 2004. We said this to our staff. You have permission to help your fellow teachers. You have permission to help your fellow teachers. And we gave everybody this catchphrase, and I've already used it. I hear your frustration, but what can we do? I hear your frustration, but what can we do? We wanted to validate the feelings, but we also wanted to say, what is the solution? Because you know and I know, have you ever been in that staff room at lunchtime when everybody's frustrated? Ooh, baby. It is just a lot of pain and agony flowing out. But can we say, you know what, we're frustrated, what can we do? Keep that phrase in your mind this year and give your staff and the people in your department permission to hold each other accountable. To say, I'm here to help you. If you can get to that point, it takes you a long way, particularly with those fundamentalists that push back on everything. The ones that say we can't, or you know what, you think, hey, I had this guy tell me one time, he looked at me and says, you know what, you're so screwed up. He says, you don't know what it's like here. I said, I hear your frustration, but what can we do to make this place better? Whoa. He couldn't think of something to do to make it better. He'd been so focused on what was screwed up, he hadn't thought about the possibility of making it better. So you this year, I would ask you to give your PLC permission to help one another, to use that phrase, to say it to one another, because it has tremendous power to move an organization forward. Now, this morning you were talking a lot about college and career ready. I think you all know what college is. Any kids ready to go to college? Anybody have any questions on that? But my bigger question is, what does career ready mean? What does career ready mean? What does it mean to get a kid ready for a career? That's a big question. We throw that thing everywhere I go around the United States. I hear superintendents, I hear boards, I hear people stand up and say, we got to get them college and career ready. But what does career ready mean? Turn to your neighbor and tell them what your definition of career ready means. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. You know, I had a teacher one day come up to me and say, not all kids are going to go to college. And I said to this person, you're absolutely right, not all kids will go to college. He says, well, we need to prepare them for careers. I said, what does that mean? What does that mean, prepare them for careers? He says, well, we need to have work with their hands. Okay. But career ready means, are you preparing them for the jobs of the 21st century that are sustainable, that can provide a living for them? Giving a kid, just teaching them to work with their hands is not providing them a sustainable income that will support them in a sustainable industry. I was in Vermont 3 months ago, and I was at a high school there, and we were talking about this very same thing. And there was a lot of grief in the room, a lot of grief. For 200 years, this high school had produced 50 kids a year from the graduating class. 40 of those 50 went to work in the granite quarry. They work granite there. Huge, massive slabs of granite that are used all over the United States. The granite quarry closed. So now, what do those 40 kids they graduate each year do? Because that's not a sustainable industry anymore. What do they do? What is the career? Now, I'm going to tell you, see the careers I have up there? Those are all registered as sustainable careers. Rebar specialist, mason, farmer, carpenter, plumber, designer. All of those are sustainable jobs for the future. But each one of those, when you look them up and you go to the guild or union that supports them, says that a kid must be able to read, write, do math, work collaboratively with one another, and be a problem solver. Every single one of those. It's not a matter of just saying work with your hands. It's not a matter of saying take wood shop or metal shop. It's about skills and qualifications that allow that student to enter those professions and be successful, to be able to earn an income. Every child in your school, short of those with the most severe special ed issues, will be expected to support themselves. Every child. Not some, not a few. Every child will be expected to support themselves. And therefore, my charge to you is, Will every child be ready? Will every child be ready to move forward? Now, in our case, how did we get there? We came to trust one another. We were patient with each other as we moved forward, and we understood that we had to validate the concerns we had, but we also had to find solutions. And then we had to take risks. We had to learn from each other. We had to step out of where we were and say, we're going to do something new. And that's a scary spot for a lot of people. This year, as you embarked in PLCs, did some of you have pushback because that's not what we've ever done before? We've never done that before. Overcoming that risk and saying, by the way, we have to do something different. Because what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and getting the same results over and over and over. So folks, this morning as we move through this, we're going to continue to provide clarity. We're going to provide the clarity of what we're doing as an overall goal, but also what we're doing individually in our work so that we can become confident. Clarity precedes confidence. The more clearly I see things, the easier it is for me to get better at it. Same with the kids in your classroom, true? When they have clarity about what is expected and what is to be done, they can reach competency. But without that clarity, there's confusion, and you tend to shoot off at random acts of improvement. So we're going to begin with this. I'm going to start with the principals in the room. What is the fundamental purpose of the position of principal? What is the fundamental purpose? What is the overall one phrase, this is what this job's about? Turn your neighbor. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. You know, I've been doing this work for 37 years, and one thing always amazed me, and it always struck me as peculiar. In the kindergarten level, in most kindergarten classes, I would see teachers do anything and everything to ensure every kid learned. Those kindergarten teachers, oh my gosh, in my district, they'd give up an arm before they'd ever let a kid fail. They would do anything and everything. But then about the third grade, things changed a little bit. Things began to change to the point where teachers said to a kid, you know what, I taught this, you should have got this. And by the time we got to the high school, and I are a high school teacher, I would say things like this, I taught it, you need to get it. Somewhere along that continuum, there's a shift of responsibility from my owning the learning as a teacher to the student earning it as the student. And what we began to say in my district was this, if we're going to ensure learning, then we have to take a step to ensure that what our practice does is get the information in their head. To go above and beyond. Now somebody out there is going, oh, come on, Rich. We got kids that just don't care. Well, I can tell you, we have the same kids. But we went out to find out collectively as a team how we could ensure that learning. So, this past year, Sanger Unified has made this poster and placed it in the entryway of every school. It does not matter which teacher your child has at our school, all children in every class will learn a guaranteed curriculum at high levels. If your child needs extra time and support to learn at high levels, we guarantee he or she will receive it. It is a commitment to every parent that brings their child in the door. Would you take your child to that school? Absolutely. I'd take my child right up the walkway and turn them in there. With that guarantee, yeah, it's pretty good. So my question is, can you make that guarantee at your school? That regardless of which teacher my child was in, I would learn the guaranteed curriculum. And that if they had trouble, you get help. Can you make that commitment at your school? And if you can't, how close are you coming to making that? What do you need to change to make that commitment? Have that discussion right now. Okay, come on back. I may have told you this story before, but in 2004 I went to my high school and we wanted to look at Algebra 1. We were really struggling with Algebra 1. And so I asked the principal, can we walk through these 5 Algebra 1 classes? And we walked into the first teacher's room, and every kid in that room had the last name of a teacher in our district. Every kid in there had the last name of a teacher in our district. Oh, wow, that's really interesting. And by the way, mostly white. We went in the next class, and the next class was predominantly ELs, English learners, with a few special ed kids. I thought, that's kind of interesting. I said to the principal, that's kind of interesting. He says, oh, yeah. We walked in the third class, it was all ethnic, all Hispanic. Everybody in the class. We went in the next room, it was all Hispanic, all ethnic, low socioeconomic. We went in the last room, mostly special ed in there. So I turned to the principal, I said, how come it's like this? He says, we take parent requests. I said, well, okay, then why does everybody choose that teacher? He's good. Whoa. Folks, if you did that on Wall Street, that's called insider trading. You go to jail. But what had happened in our district was it became, you chose a teacher. It was educational lottery as to who you got, whether you were going to learn Algebra 1. And can you tell that our high failure rates in Algebra 1, where those failure rates were coming from? Because the last 3 teachers had taught less than 3 years. The teacher in the first room had been a 20-year veteran teaching Algebra 1. Folks, there was no guaranteed curriculum. It's who you got to determine whether you learned algebra. And also, it became very apparent that if you could access the system, you got the teacher that would ensure your kid would learn and also put them on the track to graduation. We had to stand back and say this, no more selection, no more parent requests. And if a parent requested, we said, you're being serviced by the Algebra 1 team. And we guarantee that they're getting the same curriculum in every class, and your child will be prepared for algebra, geometry and Algebra 2. That's a huge step forward. So before I leave this, will you ever be ready to make that commitment? Will your school ever be ready, or your department, or your grade level? Will you be prepared to make that? And this year with your PLC, could you lay that out and say, this is where we want to be. This is where we want to be. Have that quick discussion. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. I have my good friend Mike Matos. Mike is a California educator as well. He works for Solution Tree. He uses this phrase all the time. I love this phrase. He says, every journey begins with what? Every journey begins with what? I used to say first step. He says, nah, every journey begins by facing the right direction. And that phrase up there, we talked about the high school. I can tell you, when I first started teaching, if I'd laid that on the table, we would have had people just go nuts. Holy criminy, are you telling me I have to give up my autonomy? And they could think of every reason why we shouldn't. Except that when you said, if you had a child, wouldn't you want this? Ooh, that puts the shoe on a different foot. It says to them, oh my gosh, we owe that to every kid. So, to get to this point, I would contend that you have to pose the question, isn't this what we want to be? Isn't this what we want to provide? Or are we more interested in ourselves? The risk and reward is this. The risk is I have to put myself out there to change. The reward is learning from all kids. So to get there, I have one big question. To get to that point, do we need to reform or transform? Because I'm going to tell you, your state legislature, they love the word reform in this state. Yeah, pretty much everywhere. California, we love the word reform too. So my question to you, as a district, as a school, as a department, do you need to transform or reform? Think about those two words. Have that discussion about what that is, because there's a distinct difference between those two. Have a quick discussion about that. This group is so bright. I love you guys because you had your discussions. I don't eavesdrop, but I have good hearing. I was in a district the other day. They've had 10 superintendents in 12 years. 10 superintendents in 12 years. And when we had this up there, one of the teachers said to me, she said, we reform every time a new superintendent comes in. In other words, they dismantle everything and they rebuild it from the ground up. They reform everything. She said, for one time, could we transform? Could we take the best of what we do and transform it to even something better? Can we take what's good and move it forward to get where we're at? And when I listen to you around this table this morning, I hear a lot of great ideas. Can we transform ourselves to make it even better than it was? Or do we need to reform, burn it down and start over again? Because here's my thing. Reforming, if you reform over and over and over, it will form skeptics and cynics of teachers. Because they will use this phrase, oh no, here comes a new idea. This too shall. And can we be consistent in our pathway to move along? Because by moving together, we can all buy in. We can all go in together. And my point to you is, this group in here, this leadership team, in understanding what we want to achieve, that we want to ensure learning for all students, and that we want to guarantee curriculum for all, and we want to provide support for students, if we can all come to an agreement to that, if we can see that we need to continue to transform ourselves to become better, so that our kids are college and career ready, if we can all hold hands on that and say we're going to move in the same direction, then this organization, nothing will stop it. It will move to the next level. But the other thing I told you this morning is we have to hold one another accountable. We have to have that reciprocal accountability where you need to hold the superintendent and your principal accountable, and your principal and your superintendent need to hold you accountable for doing the right thing, for ensuring learning for all students. So this morning, as we move through, we're going to try to build those pieces out so we can see where we're going very clearly, so we can move in a single direction. And it begins with, I'm going to move past this. I gave you 3 guiding principles that I will hold you accountable for. The first one is hope is not a strategy. I don't want to hear you hoping. I want to hear a plan. I don't want to blame the students. I want to look at ourselves and say, what can we do is better? And the final thing is, I want to make sure we're focused on learning. Did they learn? Those 3 things I'm going to hold you accountable for today as we move forward. Looking for solutions that we have planned. We have a strategy to get there, that we're not blaming the kids, and then, by the way, we'll ensure learning by the end. I told you before I had these tattooed on my body. You want to see them? No. Not going to do it. But I also showed you this last time I was here. It was our schema for how we moved our district forward. But as we did this, every one of these is research-based. The first one was we said development of professional learning communities. These professional learning communities is collaboration. And whether you call it team time or collaboration time, I don't care what you call it. But it's teachers collaborating to look for best solutions for learning. We said above that, we had this box right here. And that box is our district initiative box. It's the things that we plan to in-service and train teachers on over and over and over again. And in my district, we put these following things in there. We set instructional norms with higher order thinking skills. We set an EL emphasis, English learners emphasis. We said take off Common Core, curriculum enhancement and training, and we also said quality assessments with reliance on data. Folks, I told you before that that box, what goes in that box for us has been there for 16 years. We have not changed it one time. Why wouldn't we change that? Why wouldn't we keep changing things in and out of that box? Why would we always continue to train over and over on those same things? Why would we do that? Folks, what we learned was this. We've been to districts and we saw our own district where we continually changed initiatives. Every year there was a brand new initiative. And what happens is people go, oh, here it comes again. It's August, we're going to get something new. And what we said is with our PLCs and the things in those boxes, we're going to do them over and over and over, and we're going to deepen and enrich those things. We'll tweak them but not throw them out, so that every teacher knew exactly what needed to be done, and they understood that we weren't going to throw curveballs at them, brand new things. Above that, we put our response to intervention philosophy, building tiers of intervention to catch students. To catch students when they fell, to ensure that they were put back up or accelerated to catch up with their peers. And then, we said, what are the goals of our district? What are the goals of our schools? What have we pointed ourselves towards? So we're going to do a little activity right now. Everybody take 3 Post-its, please. 1, 2, 3. 3 Post-its. Get your 3 Post-its. Okay, this is a no peeky, no talky activity. No peeky, no talky activity. This is what I'd like you to do. On each Post-it, I want you to pretend that you're talking to a parent. And the parents asked you, what are the 3 goals of our school? What are the 3 fundamental focused goals of our school? And I want you to write 1 on each Post-it, the 3 goals of your school, the 3 top goals in parent language. If I were to ask you, what are the 3 top goals? Now hold it, I'm going to tell you something. Your principal right now, they're going, oh crap. Because they're praying that you know their goals are what they've set for the school, true? And I can see them getting kind of pale and white, and their knuckles are white. But the principal's going to do it also. The principal's going to write those 3 goals down also, and they're going to put it in very clear parent-friendly language. 3 goals, 1 on each Post-it, do it now. Hey folks, I'm going to tell you this is a great activity to do with your staff or your department at the beginning of the year. Or even your grade level. Everybody got the 3 down? Anybody still working on it? Here's what's going to happen. Your principal's going to lay their 3 out there. If you're a district office person, Dave's going to lay his out over here, and you're going to put yours. If yours agrees with it, you're going to put it underneath in a strand. If it doesn't, you're going to move it off to the side. Let's see how closely aligned your staff is to your principal. Do that now. Now I'm going to show you what my goals were for my schools. And by the way, these were for our high schools as well. My leadership team endorsed these and we went forward. Mine were this. Raise all students' achievement, close the achievement gap between subgroups, and ensure a safe environment. We made sure it was simple, precise language that allowed them to understand exactly what we were trying to do. And it comes to all students, not some. Now folks, after we did this, after we put these up here and we got our 3 goals, we started each school year and each semester by reviewing those and doing the same activity to see if we were in direct alignment. And what we found is by the end of the first year, my staff knew exactly what our 3 goals were. They could say them verbatim, to the point where it moved from our leadership team to our teachers to our students. Our students knew what the goals were. And what my favorite thing was is I'm standing out in front of the school one morning at the high school, and here comes Mrs. Jones. She's dragging Johnny up the sidewalk, and the first thing she says to me, Mr. Smith, one of your goals is high achievement for all students. He's not achieving. What are you going to do about it? You know my goals? That's great. But she was absolutely right. She was holding us accountable for the goal of raising her son's achievement. You want to get to the point where everybody knows that. Now that you have those goals, this is what I'm going to ask you to do. We took those goals, and below them we listed the initiatives or programs in our schools that supported those goals. We listed those things that supported each one of those goals. Like in this case, we said PLCs, you could make an argument to go all the way across, but we said PLCs raise achievement and closes achievement between the subgroups. So would you turn now and look on page, I think it's I'm not wearing my glasses. What did I do with my glasses? I'm so vain. Would you look at, it says page 2 on it for some reason, but yeah, page 2. This is what I'd like you to do. Can you list the goals, but below those goals, can you list the initiatives or programs at your school that support those goals? Let me give you some examples of this. This is Boston. This is a school in Boston. They used my 3 goals, but then they laid their initiatives and goals below it, their programmatic supports. Let me show you another one. This is Dalton, Texas. They listed their goals at the top, and notice that they choose to increase achievement, increase student growth, and safe and conducive learning environment, and then they laid the programs. When they laid their programs out, do you see where they put most of their effort? Staff was shocked. They spent so much time doing this that they oftentimes didn't support those things. This is, I'm going to skip this one. This is Laredo. They made this a little bit different. They put their mission statement above, and they laid their goals out, and then they laid their programs with a little more definition behind it. I'll show you one more. This is a high school. This is Aurora Central in Denver. They listed 4 goals across. They listed major improvement strategies, and then they listed below each one. You can make this very complicated, but what I'd like you to do with your team right now is to put your goals, the top 3 goals, at the top of the page 2, and as a team, very quickly, can you list the programs that support those goals at your school? Can you list the programmatic things you're putting in action to support those goals? Do you know them, and why you do them is what it comes down to. Do that now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, can I have you come on back for a second? Folks, let me tell you how this became very important to us as we move forward in our collaborative efforts to understand our programs and understand our goals. It also, in doing this, we learned some things that we didn't know about ourselves. Let me begin with this. When we listed the goals out and we put the programmatic pieces, we actually have teachers on our staff going, that's why we do that? They could not make the connection oftentimes between the reason for our programs and what we were trying to accomplish. It ties those together. But it also did this. It helped us sort things out. It helped us drop some things and also to look at new initiatives through a very, very, very clear eye. Let me give you an example. I had a 4th grade teacher come to me. She says, oh, Rich, guess what? The Bat Lady's in town. The Bat Lady's here. She's got 54 flying mammals. It's a great assembly. She'll come in and she'll let one of those bats fly around the cafeteria. It's a great assembly. What did I say to her? How does it support our goals? She went, I don't know. Then we're not doing the Bat Lady because it doesn't support our goals. If we can't make those connections, we're not going to do it. But here's the reciprocal accountability of this. 2 weeks later, I got a staff meeting and I stood in front of them and I said, guess what? It's PTA candy sale again. Those happy ladies will be coming around this morning to get your kids to sign up to sell candy for the PTA. What did the staff say to me? How does that fit? I don't know. So we moved it outside the instructional day. It also allowed me to go back with those ladies and say, here's our 3 goals. We can't make this fit into what we're trying to do, so we're going to move it here. They were fine with that because now they could see not only why we were trying to do it, but also how important it was to have our initiatives fill the day to support those goals. Does that make sense? I have a question. Would this help your staff see your overall program? Would it help them clearly understand not only the goals, but how you're trying to reach those goals? Is this something you should do with your staff at the beginning of the year? Turn to your neighbor and tell them what you think. All right, ladies and gentlemen, come on back, please. Come on back. love it when people begin to look at things and they begin to think, how's this going to work? Dave came up with a great one, and this group came actually with really good observation. They said, originally we put down PLCs as a goal. Is PLCs a goal? No, it's a way to achieve things. It's separating what we want to accomplish and how we're going to accomplish it. That's the difference. The what is on the top, the how is below it. And that's a big piece. What I really like was this table over here asked nuts and bolts question. Who came up with those 3 goals? And who stated those out? And what I told them was, my leadership team did. We met with the leadership team. I threw out 3 ideas. And I'll tell you, the leadership team looked at me and said, it ain't gonna work. It's too long, too many words. So the leadership team helped me squeeze those words down. Then they said to me, you know what? We gotta buy in before we can take it to the staff. So at the leadership team level, we came to consensus on those 3 goals. We asked, can we all buy in that? And once my leadership team bought in, then we went back to the staff to present them. And I didn't present them, the leadership team presented them. Why would I do it that way? Why would I do it that way? Say it, you're saying it.
So that it's not the admin telling us what to do.
We did not want it to be top down. We wanted to hold hands on this, and we want to say we're all in. And therefore, the staff presented those, and it became very clear to everyone that it was a consensus, that we'd come to it. By the way, can I tell you something? I would want to modify some of those. But when we came to consensus, that meant that we had to give some give and take to get to where we needed to be. And remember, I told you one time before, if you're working on an agreement basis within your teams, if you're saying everybody's got to agree before we can move forward, what happens? You've loaded every person on your staff with a veto. So what we said is consciously and explicitly that we work on a consensus basis. Everybody has their say, but once we've reached at least 66% of everyone buying in, we're moving forward, folks. We're moving forward. We chose 66% because we wanted 2 out of every 3 so we could move. But if you're working on an agreement basis, good luck. Good luck, because Mrs. Jones, she's not buying in. She's been here 22 years and she says, no way. At that point in time, does it all stop? Or can you bring consensus to the group and say, you know what, you've all had your say, but now we're making a decision. Well, let's try it right now. See this right here? See that approach, that graphic organizer that shows the goals and the support, how we're going to achieve it. If you can buy into that approach totally, hold up 5 fingers. A little bit less, 4, 3, 2, 1. I tepidly buy in, or fist, I don't buy in at all. On the count of 3, can you buy in to presenting this to your staff in this form? 1, 2, 3, show me. Look around the room. Do we have consensus? If we have consensus, we can move forward. Can you do me a favor? Get a fist up. Look angry. That's angry? Come on up here.
Come on, Daddy. Kiss Daddy.
Okay, Sandy, fist up, look angry. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, you really did. Sandy, you've been on the staff here at Charles Darwin High School for the last 16 years, and you know our motto, only the strong survive here. Sandy, today we presented the graphic organizer for seeing our goals and how we would approach those goals. And I noticed in the room that you have your fist up and you don't buy into that. I deeply appreciate it. Can you tell me why you don't buy in? Make it up.
Never done.
Yeah, it's new. I don't really know how, I don't really agree with those goals, first of all.
Okay. Sandy, and I know you disagree, and I understand the reasons why, but did you see the consensus that we had in the staff today?
Yes.
Okay. Sandy, even though you may disagree, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to require you to comply with those goals. and try to support them with the rest of the team. I will help you any way I can. But at this point in time, now that we have consensus, we're going to move forward. How can I help you to move forward?
Teach my class.
Sandy, what I will do, promise to do is support you so you can ensure learning for all students. But Sandy, you're a valuable member of the staff. I appreciate everything you've done. And I know that as we move forward, you'll see the value of this and you'll be able to support this. But along that way, I want to be there to help you, okay?
Okay.
Give her a big round of applause. My point is, I'm going to validate that somebody disagrees with it. I'm going to tell them, I appreciate that you have disagreements with that, but what was I truly trying to get to? How can I support you to move forward? Because we're going to move forward. We're not stopping. Now, folks, we've been talking for quite a while this morning. I want to give you about a 15-minute break here, so can we be back here at about 20 till? We're going to move into the components of PLC next. But before I move forward, was this section helpful? Was this section helpful? Does it give you ideas for the start of the school year? Because my point to you is, let's have those discussions now and load you with information and knowledge that you manipulate and churn into yours, that you can refine it to the point where it helps you. Okay? Let's take a 15-minute break. We'll be right back at 22. I have a quick video to show you. And I think I told you this before, that videos are like short stories, but they're also analogies for many things that we do in our business. You want to watch this video, and it is, well, you'll pick up on the analogy, but as soon as it's done, I'd like you to discuss, does this represent where some of our teams are at? Okay, that sound's not very loud. Bear with me for a second. That'll probably blow your heads off.
There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me. I'm gonna cry. Well, enough left to do.
Have you seen teams that reflect the same, or react the same way to not making progress towards their goal? Have that quick discussion. All right, come on back. Really, what that team was, they were admiring the problem and not solving it. In fact, they knew the goal. The goal was to get to the top of the escalator, but when it stopped, rather than taking and turning to one another and saying, what can we do? They screamed for help somewhere else. When really, the answers lied within them. All they had to do was say, hey, let's take a step together. Folks, it's the same way with us oftentimes as we move forward in the PLC process. You're going to have teams that come to screeching halts and say, help, what do we do? And oftentimes it takes us as a leadership team to say, you see the goal, this is how you take the next step. So as we move through this next section in the morning, I'm going to talk about those component pieces that we need to take into consideration as we move our teams forward. When we hit a stop, how are we going to move them forward? And I want to remind you of this little diagram right here. It's from Margaret Wheatley. This is our school, our team. It is our district. It is moving towards those goals. That box is moving together. But if I were to come to your school, I would want to see and look at your school through 6 lenses. If I were to come to your PLC team meeting, I would want to see it through 6 lenses. The first lens at the top is structure. What is the structure? What is the structure of your team? Do you have a facilitator? Is your team made up of who? What is the structure of that team? If I were to come to your school, I would want to see the structure that you're using to run your school. Is it just top down? Do you have a leadership team? How is your school organized structurally? And folks, every school has structure. Every school. But one of the things I try to see is this, and one of the things I look for when I look at schools is, do you have different teams that really take accountability and responsibility for issues at your school? In this school, we have a school leadership team, we have a school intervention team, and we have teacher teams. This school is organized themselves that way. But I would want to see how that structure and who makes up those teams. That's a critical component. So before I leave the structure piece, do you have a structure, and does the people on your campus understand it? Do they understand why they're in the PLC that they are? Do they understand what the facilitators do? And is there a leadership team that your facilitators work in? Is there a structure that your team could tell me? If I were to show up to a teacher and say, how are decisions made here at this school? What would they tell me? How would that structure look? Have that quick discussion. Is the structure very clear to those people at that work in your school? Have that discussion. All right, come back. Come back, please. Here's what I'm kind of hearing around the room. Yeah, the PLC structure with the facilitators has really helped us, but it might help our team, our school, to be able to see that structure diagram, putting in a diagram to show them how things work. Folks, I found that very true, is that when I put up with my staff and I drew the principal, and then I showed how my PLC's leaders, our facilitators, made up our leadership team, people went, oh, okay, now I understand how this works. Otherwise, a lot of times they look and they say, I don't get the structure. How is this done? So I would ask you to consider that. One other thing about structure. The structure has to lead us towards accomplishing those goals. So does your structure help you achieve those goals? Is it helping you to move forward and ensure learning for all students? The next thing is operations. And we said, how do operations work at your school? Do you have calendars? Do you have minutes? Operationally, how does it work within your school so that it flows and functions correctly? Do your PLCs understand operationally when they meet, what time they meet, where they meet? Do they have all those pieces? Is it clear how the operation works? Are you meeting every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock? How does that work? Operationally, if I were to come to your school, I would want to see some very, very straightforward things. I'd want to see your overall master calendar. I would want to see your master schedule list. I would want to see your daily schedule, and I would want to see your bell schedule. And I would ask, how do those things help you achieve your goals? How do they reach and help you achieve what you're out to do? I have to tell you, I was in Idaho the other day, high school there, and their periods were 42 minutes long. An 8-period day, 42 minutes long. If you've ever taught high school 42 minutes, by the time you get them in, set them down, get going, you're getting instructionally about 30 minutes of instruction out of that. So I went to the leadership team and I said, operationally, how's that working for you? And they said, we hate it. We absolutely hate it. The principal said, I hate it too. I said, why don't you change it? We don't know how to change the bells. I said, what? He says, we don't know how to change the bells. They had an old paper tape-driven bell system. The tape goes around and around and rings the bells. They don't even stop it on weekends because they're so afraid. Folks, sometimes we do crazy things that don't help us because we've always done it. I talked to you before about master schedule at the high school or middle school. A lot of schools you walk in and say, well, does your master schedule help your PLCs achieve what they need? We don't touch the master schedule. It is sacred to all things. Folks, oftentimes schools are unwilling to look at their master schedules and tweak it, as well as setting up set PLC times operationally. Is there a time when we all have time to meet? And we set aside PLC time? Now, Operations are critical, and your leadership team should be able to review those and make some decisions and make some changes if it's not helping you achieve your goals. The other thing we talked about up here was strategies, and we actually went over the strategies just a few minutes ago. We talked about the strategies that support us leading to our goals, and we actually laid that out. But folks, I talked to you last time I was here about the goal, the below the green line work. The below the green line work supports everything above. How does information flow at your school? Does everybody get the information they need to do their job better, or do they have to run around and figure it out? Does the information come in comprehensible, exact terms? Or, by the way, when you get the information, is it always a little sketchy? Where is your best source of information? I would want to see those things, and I would ask teachers that. So before I leave the information piece, what's your best source of information at your school? Where do you get the most exact information that allows you to do your job better? Turn to your neighbor and tell them where you get your best information. Okay, come on back, please. Come on back. I'm pushing you along because I have quite a bit of content to cover. But the conversations you are having are tremendous. On the information side, I have to tell you, I was in Phoenix recently working at one of their high schools in Phoenix. And I was working with a leadership team. We were going through this and talking about where they stood on each one of these items. And when I got to information, this leadership team was all upset. What had happened is the person that had all the information for everything at the school quit. The principal's secretary. She retired. Folks, I told you my story when I first started teaching. Same thing happened to me as a young teacher. They didn't tell me anything when I got hired. So I'm standing in my room, I don't know anything. The custodian walks by and says, "You don't know anything, do you?" "No." "Well, what do I do?" He says, "Go see Bob." Bob was the teacher two doors down. So I go see Bob. Bob was like that secretary. He knew everything. He told me how attendance worked. He told me how the schedule worked. He told me how books worked. He told me on a daily basis how the calendar worked and what was going to happen. Everybody went to Bob for information. The principal went to Bob for information. And then Bob quit. So unless we build formal pathways of information, then guess what? When Bob quits, or the head secretary quits, or something happens, then we will avoid our school falling into chaos. I would contend that the structures you built to allow those information to flow is critical. That you ensure that you have sources of information that are formally set and not informally set. The other thing on information I would tell you, it's pretty easy to do for teachers or PLC facilitators. Let me show you an information sheet that I got recently from a teacher. This is a PLC facilitator, and what she did is she's bringing her team together. Dear English 9 colleagues, it's time once again to defeat the forces of ignorance. Where? Room 132. When? Tuesday, May 16th. Time 3:10 to 4 o'clock. Topics: data review with planning for reteach and enrichment. Bring your class data marked by protocols, weekly planner. Together we can. Joan. Can I tell you that this English 9 team was in total disarray until this lead began to do this. How does this help a teacher? How does this help facilitate a team meeting? Turn to your neighbor and tell them what's good about this. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. I would tell you that Joan, the team that she works is a very, very tough group. Very tough group. Prior to her doing this, she'd have members show up that didn't bring anything. Or they'd say, "I don't know where it's at." And they would use lots of excuses to push back. The moment she began to do this with information, it cleared lots and lots of problems up. She was able to cut to the chase and get work done. It was simple. It's a simple thing to do, but it gave her team the information they needed to allow her to do her job better. It was, and by the way, this team has probably turned into one of the most high-performing teams at this school. The next thing I want to talk about is relationships. And I talked about this before when I was here, but I want to hit this again. Your relationships need to be on the professional side of the house and not the buddy side of the house. The buddy side of the house says this: if you're my buddy, I try to help you, make you happy all the time. Or, it's a buddy, I hate you, I'm going to try to screw you up every chance I get. You're not my buddy, I'll fix you. Where we want our teams is we want our teams professional. We want our teams to treat each other in a professional manner. We want to move to that place. I want to do this activity, and it's a repeat from last time, but it goes a long way at the beginning of the school year. Everybody take 3 Post-its. Take 3 Post-its. 1, 2, 3. And I told you before that the reason I use Post-its is because I have stock of 3 of them. Consider doing this at the beginning of the year with your PLC team or your overall staff. 1 on each Post-it, I want you to write an attribute or an adjective for a professional relationship. Something you would want to see in a professional relationship. An adjective or an attribute. 1 on each Post-it. An adjective or an attribute of a professional relationship. 1 on each Post-it. All right, this is what I'd like you to do now. At your table, I want you to put those out there, and I want you to string them together for the same. So put one out, and then see how many people at the table have the same thing. Do that with each word. Let's see how many we have. If they're different, put them off to one side. Otherwise, strand them together. Let's see how similar we are. All right.
You heard me talk about it. Just wait till.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you my best advice on this. One of the things that we found was most effective in moving a team and school forward was overcoming the buddy thing, where I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to screw you up. And we tried to move everything into a professional venue. In other words, we wanted to act like professionals. But when we said that, nobody had the definition of what a professional acted like. So what we did is we brought from our team the words that would define what professionalism is at our school. After we did this, we took those words, we came to consensus, we put them on a poster, and we said to everyone, this is the way we will treat one another. This is the way I expect to be treated and the way I will treat others. And we had our staff sign that they agreed to that they understood those words. And what we found is we had 100% of the staff willing to buy into that. But folks, if you're not explicit and intentional in stating those words, then professional really doesn't have a meaning. It just kind of floats up there. And so consequently, once we put those things down, it gave us a great opportunity to say to people, you know, remember when we said those words? You're kind of crossing that line. It also created a situation where I could have meaningful discussions with, as an administrator, to support you as PLC facilitators. Let me give you, for instance, Sandy, can I see you for a second? No, come on up here, Sandy.
I have sessions with my therapist on breaks already.
You're going to start crying or something.
You know her.
No, I met my therapist, I'm good to go.
I'm praying that anger management training is helping with her. You know, Sandy,
I'm in my happy place.
today I was walking by your room and I heard you were very, very upset and you were screaming at Dave. Why were you so upset?
He did not have the same goals that I had.
Sandy, and I appreciate how frustrated you were, and I know that means a great deal to you. But you were screaming at him, Sandy. And I want to remind you, remember when we did those words at the beginning of the year where we talked about professional behavior?
I do.
Okay, well, one of those words is respect. And when we start to yell at people, the respect begins to fall. Sandy, you're a great teacher at the school. You've done a lot of great things. How can I help you when you get that angry in the future?
Caribou coffee.
I'll have a cistern down at my office. What I want to do, Sandy, is I want to maintain the professional relationship. I know you do too. So I'm there to help you. So when you feel that frustration, I'd like you to step away. I'd like you to come to me, and I'll help you with that. I know that Dave can take a hard stand on things, but we need to work together in a professional manner. In the future, I'm waiting for her to say something back. In the future, when you find yourself at that spot, I'm there to help you. Does that help, Sandy?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on. Go ahead.
Are you, in this scenario, a PLC leader?
I can't be a PLC leader. What I'm saying is I would never call somebody out in front of a group. I would never do that. But as a PLC facilitator, I would remind people at my meeting, by the way, remember we're going to uphold these words. I would do that at the beginning of the meeting. Now, can I be very honest with you? As a PLC facilitator, you can inform somebody. You can try to counsel them a little bit, but in the final analysis, you're not an administrator. True? Now, one of the things I'm going to tell you is I would never, ever, and I told my facilitators this, I don't want you to come to me and say, Rich, Sandy's bugging me, come take care of her. What I would say to my facilitators, if you're struggling with somebody in your team, invite me to a team meeting. Invite me to come to a team meeting. What I found is when I go sit in a team meeting, it kind of raises the level of concern, obviously, but also gives me a chance to see what's going on and the relationships that are there. It also lets me have that discussion with her. I would also tell you this, that I've seen people who suddenly I show up at a meeting and it's very nicey nice, but that usually doesn't last very long. I go to a couple meetings where I show up unattended and things will come up. The other thing I would tell you is I'm never afraid to say something. Because these professional, and by the way, I don't know if you knew this, I was a union president when I was early in my career. Folks, these words are about respect for teachers. They're respect about one another, how we treat one another. I expect everybody to treat each other like professionals. And to that end, I'm going to support my team and my facilitators by saying, hey, you know what, you're crossing the line, we need to step back. Now my question is this, would going over these words and putting them up, would that help remind people how they should treat each other? Is that an explicit step that would move you closer to making your meetings run better? Have that quick discussion. Hey ladies and gentlemen, one of the things we're having a discussion over here about, if you have 2 or 3 people on your team that are constantly stepping across that line, folks, I expect a facilitator to take that on. I expect you to try to do your role to the best of your ability, but I have to be there to support you. I have to be there to support you, and I would expect my administrators to do that. Let's move on to the last piece, the identity. The identity piece, and we told you this before, is the identity piece of what you believe about yourself. It's also about what you believe about your school and your students. The identity really begins to be the mindset that you have to work from. And if the identity that you're holding is a negative one, then it tends to corrupt what we're trying to do. I told you before that one of the things I did with my staff was I had them give me 3 words that describe our school. And we actually put them up there. And I think I told you the story before about working in LA with one of their high schools and putting the words up there. The number 1 word that the staff used to describe their school was ghetto. The second word they used was caring. We're a caring ghetto school. Folks, what we did that explicitly to say, is this who we want to be? Is this the way we want to be known? And what we quickly found out is everybody said, no, that's not what we, then let's accentuate the positive and correct the negative. What can we do to attack this negative belief and move forward? And what we found by putting it on the table, it made a lot of people uncomfortable. But if we didn't put it on the table, we would never fixed it. If you don't address the issues, if they're not out there, if they're the hidden thing, then they never get fixed. 3 words that describe our staff, 3 words that describe our department, 3 words that describe our PLC. It will give you a very, very clear idea of the way people see things. Now, I'm going to flat out tell you, I did this with a foreign language department the other day, and the number 1 word they used to describe themselves, forgotten. The second word they put down was competent. What they feel like is they're being very competent, but nobody pays any attention to them, that they're just out there. So what we said with that team is, how can we get ourselves to we feel like we're making an impact on the school, that we're noticed? And so consequently, they came up with a great idea. They have actually putting notes in teachers' boxes or sending it out through the email about what they're doing during this semester or this quarter. They're putting it out with pictures and everything else, and what they found was everybody in the school's going, what's going on with foreign language? Oh my gosh, they're doing some stuff. It was silly, but it was information that allowed them to identify themselves for the positive work they do. Oftentimes, special ed staffs struggle with their identity, what they do, what their accomplishments are. And what we found was this, is when we began to put out a positive identity remarks, that the special ed staff began to rally around that and make huge strides forward. You saw the drop in referrals and entrances into special ed. By doing that, what we found was they were able to focus on what was positive. Folks, I've covered all 6 lenses very, very quickly. Those lenses at your school, which lens is your strength and which lens do you need to work on? Which lens is your strength and which lens do you need to work on as a school? Have that discussion very quickly. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. Hey folks, for your leadership teams, I would like to suggest something. For your PLC leadership teams, or when you meet with your facilitators, those 6 lenses are tremendous as agenda items. They're tremendous as agenda items because you can move through each one and you can learn a lot about what's happening with those teams. Where are we at on each one of those categories makes a big difference. I want to take you to the next big piece that we're going to cover today. And I need to preface this piece by talking about this, the knowing, doing gap. Let me give an example of the knowing, doing gap. Knowing and doing are 2 different things. I know a lot of stuff, but sometimes I choose not to do it. Let me give you for instance, in my life, weight. I have a tremendous weight problem. I know that if I eat less and burn more calories, that my weight will fall. I know that. In fact, I've taken a lot of attempts at that. But earlier this year, in October, I came home from a trip, walked to the door, and my wife looked at me and she says, "Get a little chunky, monkey. We need to do something about this." I said, "What are you talking about?" She says, "Those pants, you're over the top of your pants. We're not doing that. I want to keep you alive a little bit longer." So I said, "Well, what are we going to do, baby?" She says, "I'm going to weigh you before you go on your next trip, and I'm going to weigh you when you get home." So what's every good husband do? Yes, darling. So before I went on the trip, I hopped on the scale, and she charted it. Put her weight in, did that. And then I went to New Orleans for 4 days. Have you ever been there? I ate myself across that city. It's amazing. Fried oysters, penne. I mean, it just goes on and on. So I walk in the door, I get home, and she says, "Get on the scale." I put on 4 pounds. She says, "Hold it. The idea is to weigh yourself and lose weight when you come back." She says, "We're going to do this again." So she says, "Hop on a scale." So I hopped on a scale. She weighs me. She goes, "All right, now go." Went to San Antonio. Have you ever been to San Antonio? That Southwest cooking is amazing. Oh my gosh. I ate myself across San Antonio. It was amazing. So I get home, hop on the scale, I put on 2 pounds. She says this pre-test, post-test is not working. We got to get better at this. So, okay, what's that mean, baby? Well, she bought me one of these. It's a jawbone. What it does is it measures how many steps I take a day. And it measures my energy that I use, the calorie burns I have. I also have to enter what I eat during the day. Well, this little goodie, it goes from here to my phone to her computer. For instance, last night, she calls and she says, "Hey baby, you've only taken 7,000 steps today, you need 3,000 more." I said, "Baby, I can barely walk." She says, "You need 3,000 more." So I'm out walking around the hotel at 9 o'clock last night to get my 10,000 steps. Guess what? She's progress monitoring me, is she not? And when I get home every time now, I'm losing weight because I'm not eating the stuff I did before and I'm working out more. I have to tell you, since October, I've lost 22 pounds. I hate it. I hate it. I just want to tell you, I hate the thing. It drives me nuts. But what she did is she closed the gap between the pre-test, post-test by doing the progress monitoring along the way. It gave her a way to monitor what I was doing. Now, I'm going to tell you, there's times I've defeated this thing. I hooked it to one of our dogs the other day and let him run around for a while. There's ways to get around it that I've found. By the way, we got these little Yorkies. 17,000 steps that day, because that dog ran around the backyard for about 45 minutes. It was pretty good. But one of the things that we really hit upon was we get to the end of the semester and people go, "Well, it's not going very well." So we asked ourselves, how can we progress monitor what we're doing? How can we move things forward? Well, guys, I had shown you the flow chart. We'd actually gone through that flow chart. And so consequently, I've laid that out for you very clearly. And I don't think that I need to go through every component of this. But we got schools that were doing that and the results were not turning out that good. We would get to the end of this year and we go, "Whoa, we're not making the progress we want to make." With most people we were, but not all. So we said, we're not progress monitoring implementation. We're not really looking at what we're doing very closely to say, are they have these pieces in place? So what we did is we went back to Rick before and we said, "Rick, give us some guidance on something we can do to progress monitor our implementation." And so what Rick did is he showed us the 18 critical issues. Would you turn, I've got these right now. Would you please turn to page 8? I'm going to show you a couple monitoring tools today, but this is a very, very good one. These 18 critical issues are the things that need to be in place that would correspond with that flow chart up there, that would take us through. They're things that should happen for implementation that would make a big difference. Now, these 18 items are all research-based. They've got tons of research, and if you read in the book, Learning by Doing, he backs up each component of this with research. Now, what we find is that when we find teams that were not doing well, they had issues in some of these 18 areas that they were not following up on, that they were not doing a good job. So what I'd like to go through these very, very quickly with you and just point out a few things, and then what I'm going to ask your team to do is sit down and talk about it as a school and see where your weaknesses and strengths are. Now, as you run down these, like number 1, we have identified team norms and protocols to guide us in working together. That makes a lot of sense, and I think everybody gets that. You got to have team norms, and we've talked about that, and I showed you some ways to do it. But then you get down to number 5. Number 5 says, we have identified course content or topics that can be eliminated so we can devote more time to essential learnings. Well, there are teams that look at that and go, "Woo-hoo, we get to cut all this stuff out." That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is in some cases you may have things that people are teaching that really don't correspond to the course. They're really not making a big difference. Let me give you for instance. I was in a classroom the other day and a teacher, she was spending an inordinate amount of time on butterflies. She had brought out the entire butterfly collection. I mean, she had spent 5 days on butterflies. Well, folks, butterflies are great, and I deeply appreciate that, but it really didn't lead to the course content, what she needed to accomplish for her grade level. And so the principal worked with her to say, how can we make this either correspond, or how can we eliminate this to get to where we need to be? What this means is, the number 5, what it's saying is, are we making good decisions about our content? That's what it comes down to. One other that I want to point out before I turn you loose on this is number 12. We have developed common summative assessments that help us assess the strengths and weaknesses of our program. In your state, you have state tests that help you see that. Those summative tests can also be end of semester, end of year tests that you can look at to say, how's our program doing? Here's the difference between a formative and summative test. I love CSI. I love watching that show. CSI, it's a great show, right? They do autopsies on people, and I've never seen the guy get up off the slab after an autopsy. It only tells you how he died. It's the same way with the summative test. All it tells you is what happened. It doesn't allow you to fix it. So when you get your state test results, can you go back and fix it? No, it's an autopsy. It tells you what happened, but it doesn't give you time to correct it. Summative tests in something, they don't ever allow for re-instruction. A formative test allows you to go back and fix it. It's the same way with a physical. When I go get a physical, guess what? We can fix what's wrong. If I get an autopsy, no, not going to help me a whole lot. The difference between formative and summative is, can you fix it? Can you fix it with that data? So when you see the summative piece on number 12, I want you to think of, does this help us? Can we re-instruct? Now, here's what I'd like you to do as a team. I want you to do this individually first and then come back and compare your results. There's a 10-point scale, 1 through 10. What I'd like you to do is mark down 1 through 10, rate on each one how your school is doing on each one of these. And for PLC facilitators, it's how your team is doing on it. And for school administrators, it's how your school is doing it. So you're going to compare the team to the overall school. The district office people are going to do the district. How are we doing on each one of these? Now, before I turn you loose, I'm going to come back to you, and if you mark yourself as a 10, I'm going to ask you, what evidence do you have of that? What evidence do you have that you're doing that? So, can you please go through all 18 issues and mark down how you did? Do that now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, come on back. Now, principals at your table, this is what I'd like you to do. You've gone through all 18 and you've made a decision for your team, for your PLC within that you lead. What I'd like you to do now is, if you'll look at page 9, at your table for each one of the 18 items, principals, I'd like your school to come to consensus as to where you're at. Either we are there consistently, that teams are doing this on a regular basis. It's a work in progress. We're only about halfway, 60% there. Or by the way, we're not there at all, which is not consistently happening at all. That means you haven't got everybody moving the same direction. So what I'd like to do at your table is to make that decision as to where your school is on each one of these. So you're going to mark for each school on a consensus basis at your table where your team is at on each one of these 18. Make sure that you understand very, very clearly. We are there consistently. If you're there consistently, then you should have evidence of that. And I'm going to come back to the evidence thing this afternoon, and we're going to kind of really chase that down as to what that looks like. You want to make sure that you've got some way to actually verify why you marked that spot. So, principals at your table, would you please go through 18 and figure out where your school is on each one of those 18? Do that now. Also, make sure, principals, you have a single sheet, a master sheet. Hey, folks. I want to have a quick discussion about essential standards. Want to have a quick discussion about essential standards, and then I want to do a little activity with you. Then we'll come back and we'll close with looking at some documentary pieces that you might consider putting in place to measure where your teams are at. Can I, it is a class, isn't it? Yeah, I let you guys loose, you run around all the place, corralling everybody back in a corner. Well, I'm going to tell you, that's why I'm going to do a little activity here in a second. Have you ever had this occasion where you've gotten a kid in your class and you're teaching it, and you look at the kid and you say these words? Who did you have last year? Have you ever done that?
Yes.
Didn't they teach you about this in your last grade level? Because most kids will tell you, no, I never learned that. One of the things that we began to look at was the discrepancy in performance. We would do our PLCs, but when we get to the end of the year, the testing for many of our teams and some of our schools did not match what we thought our CFAs would come out to be. Our CFAs were saying one thing, but when we got to the year, we did not see the growth we wanted. And I want to point out a couple things to you right now. One of the things we found out as we began to look at that, and this goes back to those 18 critical issues, we began to look at that essential standard. And what we realized is some of our teams chose essential standards that were softballs. They were puffy, they were not real, they did not have an impact. So the question I have is, how are you choosing your essential standards? What criteria are you using to choose those essential standards? Because my point to you is, if you choose a standard that's not really hard-hitting, it doesn't get you anywhere. So what criteria, how are you determining the essential standard that your team is going to attack? Turn to your neighbor and explain how your team chooses their essential standards. Do that now. All right, come on back, please. Come on back. I'm going to give you two nuts and bolts pieces that we did. We went back to our teams and we said, when you choose, and by the way, our leadership team came up with this, when you choose an essential standard, you need to reference it back to something from the high-stakes state test. They had to show connection between the essential standard and the high-stakes test. The second thing we did is, you had to have the grade level or teacher above you or team above you review the essential standards that you were going to cover for that year. Folks, there were a lot of people that had issues with that. That the second grade team would take their essential standards and ask for a blessing by the third grade team. That the Algebra 1 teacher would go to the Algebra 2 team and say, I need your blessing on this. That World History would ask US History for a blessing on this. But what we found was, it made us vertically much more tight. And it made everybody understand that the prior teacher, the teacher that teaches before you, was covering these things. It made our whole team grow, not only horizontally, but vertically. Would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to be asked to tie your essential standards to your state test or whatever high stakes? And would you think it would be a good idea to ask the next grade level above you to review your essential standards? Have that discussion very quickly. Could do that possibly work at your school? All right, come on back, please. Come on back. As a matter of practice, we did two things. We asked our teams to show us or make the connection between high stakes tests and the standard they chose. We also asked them to work collaboratively with the team above them to ensure that the standard that the team above them knew that that standard was helping them. We found those two things as very helpful. But one of the things that came up was this. when our teams began to write their CFAs, their Common Formative Assessments, what we began to realize is many teams wrote those Common Formative Assessments at very low rigor levels. Very low rigor levels, so that everybody was passing it the first time around, which, by the way, may be because of practice, but when we began to look at those Common Formative Assessments, we found that some teams wrote them at very, very, very low rigor levels. So before I move into this discussion of raising the level of that, I have a question for you. Define rigor. We use it in our business all the time, but I want you to define the word rigor as it pertains to instruction and learning. What does rigor mean? Turn to your neighbor and tell them what rigor means. All right. This is what I'm hearing around the room. I heard one person say difficulty. I heard another person say it has to be harder or more, it requires more of the student. I'm going to give you a functional definition for rigor. Rigor, as defined also by the federal government and their Common Core, has to do with complexity. Complexity. How complex the question is determines the rigor. Let me give you an example of this. Everybody think of the Three Little Pigs. Know the story? I want you to think of a very basic comprehension question, a very simple comprehension question. Turn to your neighbor and tell them that question. Oh, I heard it around the room. How many pigs were there? All right, come back. Come back. Hey, a basic comprehension question is a one-word answer. How many pigs were there? 3. What type of animals were they? Pigs. Theory, usually a one-word response will get it. Now I want you to think of a more complex comprehension question. A more complex comprehension question. To make it more complex, it's going to be more than a one-word answer. So I want you to think of the most complex question you could ask a student that would force them into a deeper comprehension of that story. Think complexity. Come up with a question and ask your partner. All right, come on back. There's several great questions out there. One of them there was, what was the author's purpose in writing this? That requires a longer response that forces the student to think at higher levels. I had one person over here who says, why is pork better for you? You're forcing a student to think in more complex terms and give you a longer response. Now this is what we learned when we started looking at our CFAs. We were asking low complex questions. We were asking questions is, do you like this story? Yes or no? And what we tried to get our teams to do, and they actually did a very good job, is they began to move their questions up in complexity, asking for a deeper understanding, a proof of deeper understanding, by writing them at different levels. What was important about that was really clear to us when we got the final results for that first year. Those teams that asked and forced and taught to more rigorous levels or more complex levels had better results. Those teams that taught at low rigor levels got very low results. So one of the things is we began to look at Bloom's. Everybody remember Bloom from college days? Bloom is really a different thing because Bloom is really about the type of thinking. What we wanted to do was force our teams into deeper thinking, and so we went with Webb's DOK levels, depth of knowledge. You're all familiar with depth of knowledge? DOK? But we said this wheel of words that go with the DOK levels didn't help. It didn't help, and I'll tell you why. We found that teachers would pick a word and say, is this analyzation correct? Is that low complexity or high complexity? low. It's you're using the word, and we'd have teachers say, oh, but that's a DOK 3 level or a DOK 4 level. And we'd say, no, because it's the response you require of a student that determines the rigor. It's the response that you require from a student that determines the rigor, not the question, the response that you're after. So we actually began to work with a team in Stanford, and we began to look at things differently in regards to our CFA. We realized that when teachers taught, when you're instructing, you're doing one of three things. You're either trying to get students to acquire the knowledge, you're trying to get students to use the knowledge, or you're trying to get kids to extend the knowledge. And that has to do, and you're looking for that chart. I'll give you this chart at the end of the day, okay? In fact, I'm going to give you this whole PowerPoint. So when we began to write questions, we asked our teachers, your kids need to be able to prove this, that they've acquired the knowledge, they know how to use the knowledge, but also can they extend that knowledge by application beyond the basics? Can they do it more in a more complex fashion? Teachers looked at us and said, how am I supposed to teach that? How do I teach that? Well, we said those three things actually correspond with the 4 DOK levels. And you're all familiar with the DOK levels. They go from recall all the way to extended learning. And what we found is teachers looked at us and said, you know, Rich, God, you got to give me a break. How do I teach this? How do I teach? And then how do I assess at those higher levels? Well, we went back with my friends at Stanford and we laid in activities. And what we did is we said these activities run the gamut from a very recall level all the way to extended thinking. We said at this end of the spectrum, these are no-brainers. Memorize, recall, recite, or define. And we said at the other end, at the higher, more complex thinking levels, critique, solve, apply concepts, generate or create. But here's what we learned very quickly. Teachers tended to work at one end or the other. But to bring kids along, we also needed to do some of those activities and assess across the spectrum. So we asked our teachers to consider this. That if I were to give you a standard and ask you to think of questions that move across that move from basic recall to making observations, to categorizing, to generalizing, to creation. Now we're asking kids to think at higher levels. And when we assess at those higher levels, we have deeper learning. So let me give you an example of this. You're moving from concrete to complex thinking. That's the idea. So when we wrote our CFAs, we began to think in those terms. Is this a concrete question? It's very basic, or is it more complex? Everybody know this, the water cycle? You all learned this. Think of the water cycle. Think of how the water cycle works. If you were to teach that as a standard, learning the water cycle, what questions would you ask, what questions would you ask, or activities for the students to perform to prove they've learned that, beginning in this column and moving across? Now, I don't want you to come up with a question or activity in each one of these. Just pick one and do it for each column, one per column. So at your table, think of the water cycle. And we're going to write a CFA, a Common Formative Assessment, forcing that standard across into complexity, more complex levels. So I want you to look up there and I want you to think the water cycle. First start with the first column and move across. So you'll have 5 questions by the end that go from very concrete to more complex. Do that now. All right, come on back, come on back. Hey folks, let me tell you what's happening around the room. If we were just to teach the water cycle, if we were just to absolutely teach it, 90% of instruction on the water cycle takes place at this end. But we know, who's a science person at the high school? At the high school level, what do you want to be able to do? Just know the water cycle? What else do you want them to do?
apply it to real world situations?
Yeah, you want to take it deeper. You want those kids to learn that cycle at deeper levels. What I'm telling you is that when we begin to look at standards, if you're going to get the depth you need, consider putting that standard up against this chart and asking yourself, how complex do we need to teach this so kids have it? Folks, that helps you design your CFA in a meaningful way. Now you're not just lowballing it, you're giving them things that are really going to try them. So let's see what we came up with. Somebody give me a question or an activity here for the water cycle. Call it out, simple one.
Label it.
Label the water cycle. Give me something right here.
Draw
Pardon me?
it. Draw it.
Draw the water cycle. Create it, yeah. Determine, perform the procedure by drawing it out. Works for me. What about here?
Describe it, teach to someone.
Say it.
Teach it to someone or share it.
Communicate it. Teach it to someone else. See if you can show that someone how the water cycle works. Demonstrate it to somebody. Communicate the understanding of how it works. Give me something here.
We were saying at our table about like the develop a logical argument on maybe like water restriction rules or pollution things.
Where you going? In California? Conjecture. What happens if it doesn't rain? Oh, we can look out the window and see that today. Another one might be, can you name a spot in your house where you can observe the water cycle? Name a spot in your house you can observe the water cycle. The bathroom. Fogs up and it rains, particularly in this place with the humidity here. Okay, give me something here, the last column.
Could have a case study where students would need to read a piece of text on an actual water problem and then apply, to come up with a solution and apply their understanding of the water cycle to support that solution.
That's very good. That's a very complex standard. You take that standard to a very high complex. How about this one? Does the water cycle work in the North Pole? Why or why not? Now you're forcing students to think in more complex terms and force them along. One of the things that we saw this morning was there was a disconnect between the work you did last year and the results you got. And what we're trying to do is come up with some possible ways that you might address that. And one of the key things is you break down your data this year, you need to begin to look at those high stakes tests and say, as an autopsy, a summative test, why did we get those results and what do we need to change instructionally to get our kids to this point? I would contend that there's two big things that you might consider. One, you may have picked the wrong standards. You may not have picked the standards that you need to hit. Second thing is, you may have not understood or assessed those standards at deep enough levels. In looking at your work, I would ask you to go back and consider, when you work with your team, are you hitting up here the essential standard? Are you understanding the standard in more complex terms? And are you assessing it at the correct level? Now, we learned, and I've learned across the United States, that teams that go through the perfunctory performance of PLCs, that are just doing it because they're required to do it, their results never come out as high as they should. But when you do it in a meaningful way that's out to ensure that students know the standard at complex levels, you'll find they learn it at high levels. And your performance at the end will begin to show that progress you're looking for. Does that make sense? So here's my question. When you look at what you did last year, were you hitting the right standards and were you assessing and teaching at the right complexity levels? Were you doing that or were you off? Do you see room for improvement in that area? Have that quick discussion. ladies and gentlemen, would you look at the very last page of your packet, please? And could you do me a favor? Would you find a partner, hand to hand? Show me your partner. I want to see peanut butter and jelly. You should only have one partner. Peanut butter and jelly. You should only have one partner. Anybody by themselves? There's one right here and there's one over there. She's up here. Okay, between the two partners, the two of you that are together, would you choose one person to be the teacher and one person to be the student? All right, teachers, the person that's been chosen as a teacher, I want you to take your packet and meet me out in the foyer right out there. Everybody else, students, just wait here. Students, while we're gone, look for a pen or pencil.
I'm the teacher.
Look here, look at me. Show me your eyes. Listen close. I'd like to welcome you to the Minnesota test of auditory instruction giving. This is what you'll do. Your teachers will instruct you over the next 2 minutes to guide your pen from the star to the light bulb. During that 2 minutes, you are to listen to the instructions your teachers have. For competency, to reach proficiency of this, you must clear the distance from the star to the light bulb in 2 minutes and be within a 1/4 inch of the line on either side. Your teacher may not touch you or move your paper. You must keep your eyes closed until you've completed the exercise. Students, put your pins on the star now. Close your eyes. Excuse me, we have 2 students that are lost. You know what? You're an EL student, no wonder. I'll explain that in a second. Eyes closed, pin on the star, ready, begin. All right. Teachers, grab your students' performance. I want you to grab your students' performance, and I want you to go out in the foyer and get in groups of 4 to 5. And by the way, when you're standing out there, this is the way I want you to stand there. You're going to stand with your students' work like this. You're going to get groups of 4 or 5, and what you're going to do is you're going to compare and talk about what worked and didn't work, and how you might increase the performance. We're going to do this again, and I expect all of you to do better. So teachers, go outside and talk it over.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Students, I'm going to talk to you guys. So students, you stay here. Teachers, go out there and get groups and talk about it. Can I point out something to you students while you're here? Folks, there's a couple things I wanted to point out to students. Did you notice that as time went on, as the teacher felt more pressure, what did they do? Say it? They began to rush. They began to push because they had not calculated the time correctly. They were really pushing. The other thing, did you notice they came up out of their chairs and were basically hovering about 2 inches off your paper? You didn't see it, but I'm going to tell you they were right there. Second thing I'm going to tell you is that, did you notice that as they taught, their voices kept getting higher and higher and higher and higher? What I found in the years I've done this, that the pressure of trying to get this with very little instruction raises that level of concern to the point where they begin to exhibit a lot of different behavior. Now, 2 things did happen. Right here and here. Sandy, Stabby, whatever. These 2 teachers taught their students in Spanish. They did not use English to talk with these students. They gave all their instructions in Spanish. What happened with you guys when they began to do that? How did you act?
I gave up. She went to the bathroom and we nodded.
Let me tell you, these two exhibited exactly like an EL student would. They began to nod yes when they didn't understand, and one of them used any excuse to get out of that chair. It became very, very difficult for them. How'd you do on that?
I think I killed it.
You killed it. What Dave did is he broke it down to a language component. He broke it into vocabulary to get it across. It was a great example of the two approaches. Now, I'm going to go out there and work with you guys. I'm going to come right back. Be prepared. Would you do me a favor? Would you take out the other, you should have a blank one. Bring the blank one out, and you guys can look at that while I talk with them. They'll be right in. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Somebody just asked me a minute ago, what was the best group I've ever had do this? And I have to tell you, the best group I've ever had do this activity, Lemoore Naval Air Station, the school there. And it was a group of military instructors, and they were right on the first time. Vector right 2 centimeters, vector left 260. They were able to do it, and by the way, finished in about a minute and a quarter. So we're about ready to improve our scores now this time. We're going to improve what we did. You've been instructed, you've re-gone over everything. Questions? Hang on, guys. I can't hear it. She has an IEP or a language special. She wants to do it on her own. Okay. You may follow the IEP in that case. Ladies and gentlemen, students, put your pencil on the star and close your eyes. You have 2 minutes to complete this test. Begin. And time. Do me a favor. Compare the two results and see if we had an improvement from the last time. If you had an overall improvement, please stand up. If you had an overall improvement, please stand up. Folks, I've done this tons of times, and normally, in fact, if we looked around, you probably can see more of that. We were over half of us improved on that. Folks, my point to you is collaboration and discussion about instructional practices and moving forward will lead you to those improvements, having those discussions. Now, in some cases, some people, they struggle the second time. But what we found is the noise in here got a lot less, you were much more focused, and the team outside had a big discussion about vocabulary. Students, did you notice a difference this time? Would you please tell your teacher how they improved? All right, come on back. Hey folks, I want to also point out, this is a great activity to start the school of the year to talk about collaboration, the impact it has on us. But also it reminds our teachers about what it's like to be a student. What it's like to be a student. Your question back there about time, that's a big one. And a lot of times those discussions are good to have and remind us what it's like to be a kid. I was watching these guys over here again with the EL, with their instructions being given in Spanish. Both teams became that much more calm and focused because they had a better idea. They've been instructed in a way that would improve their results. Did you guys improve back there, Tulsa? Yeah, I think that watching you also, you are a lot calmer too. So I'm seeing that people, when you focus on instruction, we get better at what we do. For the last activity today, we're going to go back to the 18 critical issues. Your teams looked at those 18 critical issues and you marked them as consistent, approaching, or inconsistent. 3 areas. This is what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to find 3 areas out of those 18 that as a school you're going to focus on this year. 3 areas that you are absolutely going to make major improvements on. Now I'm going to tell you, those improvements should happen early in the school year. I don't want to see you waiting until May to work on one of these. So what I'd like you to do is the following. I want you to choose 3 focus areas out of those 18 that your school needs to work on and make improvements on. And then the second piece. I want you to construct a chart. You put the 3 areas you're working on, their number, or you can write what they are in these boxes. But beside it, I want you to write what documentary evidence will you have that proves your teams are moving forward. In other words, if I put number 1, then what's my documentary evidence of what number 1, that we're doing number 1 better? What would that be? Look at number 1 on your 18 list. Say it. You'd want to see the norms. That would be the documentary evidence you would expect to see on that. So what I need you to do is to go through with your team, pick 3, and I want you to write what documentary evidence you would have your team produce to prove they're making progress in those 3 areas. Because here's the deal. If I tell you we're going to focus on 3 areas, but we don't monitor it, then it won't happen. What gets monitored gets done. Plus, if you're, as a leadership team, you bring that documentation in to prove that you're working on those, then it allows us to have a discussion. The same way we had a discussion outside about how we can improve our performance on this little exercise. So, each team will produce a chart. There's chart paper and felt pins back there, showing 3 areas of focus and the documentation you'll approve to make sure that everybody knows you're improving those 3 areas. Does anybody have any questions? You're going to have about 20 minutes to do this in, and then we're going to put them up and we're going to look around the room. When you complete it, put your school name on it, and then we'll put it up on the wall and we'll take a look. Ready? Begin. Dave, you want to close the word, right?
Sure. That's where.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, can I have you stop and look here right where you're at, please? Can I see your eyeballs here? We said we'd finish at 2:30, and I've already taken you past, but can I tell you the quality of your discussions are very good. What I really like, particularly high school, I'm real proud of you guys, put a lot of stuff on the table, and we're hashing through it. These are the type of things you need to get straight as a leadership team so that the rest of your staff can follow you. But if you as a leadership team don't have these things figured out, then guess what? It's going to be a tough time getting all the departments and grade levels to move in a straight direction. Folks, we've covered a lot of stuff today. When you think about where we started with talking about beliefs, setting goals and objectives, and laying this stuff out to the point of monitoring, you've been given a lot of tools to move this thing forward. But none of that happens unless you choose to do it. And my point is, your kids deserve this. Your kids deserve the very best they can get, and I think this staff has the ability to do that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Before I do, I would suggest that you work to complete this, and maybe, I don't know if the district is going to ask you to turn those in or not, but what you're doing right now, unless you monitor it, it doesn't happen. All right, thank you all very much, Dave.
So as far as turning it in, cameras are pretty snazzy these days where you could take a picture. If you would take a picture, I'd love to see all the great work from each individual school, whether it's CLC and ABE or secondary. Please send a copy my way. I'd love to see those. And more than anything, so we can support what you are doing, so we can support and communicate with new coaches, so we can support and communicate throughout. There's always a map of how the room gets set up at the end. I would just ask that Jane just flash something out in here. Yeah, Jane, she's got the map. I also want to respect if your team would like to hang out for 15 more minutes, just to have those final conversations, feel free to do so. If your team is buttoned up and ready to tag, feel free to do so. I just want to respect wherever you're at with your team to move forward accordingly. Just an admin, we'll kind of hang back here, and we're going to meet with Rich just to help kind of debrief as well and talk about opening week with all staff, because Rich is coming in for a day with secondary and a day with elementary. And just, I picked up a lot of really good pointers today. Hopefully you did as well. Any announcements for the good of the group? Okay.
Just in terms of cleanup, we have a rather extensive checklist that we have to have somebody come and actually observe our kind of buttoning up of this place. So if each school would take an area and make sure trash is picked up, trash needs to be bagged, we have to make sure the tables are all washed off. High school staff, which Melissa asked if your team could get all the coolers back to the high school. And then to find a place to keep the coolers for, or save the coolers for her, and to save any of the soda and water for new teacher stuff for next week. And then we just need to get all the trash picked up and the tables returned so we can get our refund back.
And just last comment is just I'm proud of your work. I'm proud of each school, your teams, and what you're doing, and I'm looking forward to this year. Have a great day.